for this, our last EPRS event, our last roundtable or book talk before the summer holidays. And I'm Anthony Teasdale from the Parliamentary Research Service. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to join us this lunchtime for a conversation in our book talk series, which is about a new book that's just come out on the European Parliament in Italian called Alla, scoperta del Parlamento europeo, which rediscovering the European Parliament. And it attempts to provide a portrait of the institutional development and importance and centrality of the Parliament in the politics of the European Union and in our society and culture, in fact, more broadly, in Europe. It's been written by Professor Giacomo di Federico, who is Professor of Law at Bologna University. He joins us today. Thank you so much for sparing the time. His research focuses in Bologna on EU constitutional law, on fundamental rights and the internal market, and he's currently writing about the EU's reaction to the coronavirus crisis. And he's going to be joined after some introductory remarks when he talks about what the book says, why he wrote it, what new insights it brings to bear. He's going to be joined by a very distinguished panel of practitioners and academics, and I'll introduce them in a moment. Just to say that books about the European Parliament come out on average about once every 2 or 3 years, and we try to carry them here in this EPRS Book Talk series. It's a great opportunity for us to discuss current academic writing about the Union as a political institution. And who better to do that today than Professor Di Federico. The panel who will be joining him is, as I say, a combination of practitioners and academics. Elisabetta Gualmini, a member of the European Parliament. She's Professor of Political Science at Bologna University. Has been a member of the European Parliament the last couple of years, a member of the Budgets Committee and the Employment Committee. She's a former president of the Carlo Cataiano Research Institute in Italy and vice president of our home region of Emilia-Romagna. Sandra Gozzi, who's been also a member of the European Parliament recently, is a member of the Constitutional and Internal Market Committees, former Italian Secretary of State for European Affairs, former advisor to both the Italian and the French Prime Ministers on Europe, and former advisor also to the President of the European Commission. He's currently President of the European Union of Federalists. Eleanor Spaventa, Professor of European Law at Bocconi Law School in Milan and visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges. She previously taught in the United Kingdom at Cambridge, Durham and Birmingham universities, and is currently writing on decision-making in the Council and looking in particular at the relationship between the member states individually and collectively in the context of the European Council and on the impact of Next Generation EU. And last but not least in the panel, Martin Westlake, former Secretary General of the European Economic and Social Committee. He's worked in the Council Secretariat, in the European Commission, and in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. And he's a visiting professor both at the London School of Economics and at the College of Europe in Bruges. And indeed is the author of a book, admittedly some years ago, called A Modern Guide to the European Parliament. And that discussion will be moderated by Professor Gabi Umbach, part-time professor at the Robert Schuman Center at the European University Institute in Florence, director of their Global Stat initiative there, and also adjunct professor at Cologne and Innsbruck University, and a non-resident visiting fellow at the European Parliamentary Research Service, where she used to work. So that's our lineup today. It's going to be, I think, a great discussion, and we're going to go straight over to Giacomo to tell us about the book that he's written. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for what I think promises to be a really nice way of rounding off our EPRS series of talks of various kinds in the run-up to this well-earned summer vacation. Over to you, Giacomo.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin by thanking MP Professor Elisabetta Gualmini, who was just mentioned, for having agreed to sponsor this event, and of course the Research Service of the European Parliament for accepting the proposal and organizing this book presentation. And of course, my thanks go in this sense also to Gabi for managing the event. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the speakers for accepting the invitation. And last but not least, I feel the need to thank all the authors who have contributed then to this publication, which I gladly edited. Now, with a view to leave the speakers as much as time as possible to elaborate on the role of the European Parliament as a political institution, I will limit myself to briefly recall the background of the work and elaborate on some specific issues addressed therein in light of the latest developments and future perspectives to foster, hopefully, the debate. Now, the editorial project was born with the specific intent to counteract the lack of awareness concerning the European Parliament and to offer an overview of its activities in order to fully appreciate its nature and function. It was conceived actually as a sideline on the sidelines of the conference at the University of Bologna in March of 2019, entitled, as was recalled, Rediscovering the European Parliament and the Founding Values of the Union. This event was organized as part of a broader initiative on the European elections of 2019, which was promoted also by the representation of the Commission in Italy and found its place within the Italian network of EU documentation centers. The idea here was primarily raising awareness among civil society and students on the elections held in the then 28 member states, I'll come back to this, of the European Union. This was, of course, between 23rd and 26th of May 2019, as we all remember. Now, the resulting publication actually brings together the contributions of the speakers at that conference, as well as other colleagues and young scholars who have dealt with the main topics which had been left outside the program due to organizational needs and, of course, time constraints. Now, in particular, the authors were asked to highlight the existing criticalities from an interinstitutional perspective, with particular regard to the activity of the 8th legislature. The volume is, as you might have seen, divided in two parts. The first deals with the role of the European Parliament within the EU legal order more in general. The second focuses on the relationship between the European Parliament and the national systems, the national legal orders of the member states. The first part begins with the origins, as it's natural, of the assembly, then parliament, and the background, rationale, and logics which inspired and governed its creation and functioning over the years. Now, of course, what we see today at work is certainly a completely different parliament operating in profoundly distinct political and economic context. The book then moves on to consider the pivotal role, I'm confident we'll get back to this, of the European Parliament in defending the founding values of the Union, highlighting the commitment in this regard of the institution to fundamental right protection, but also signaling a certain distrust of MEPs towards the Commission's ability to act in a political vacuum. That being said, I have to say the rise of sovereignism in the recent common declaration announcing the formation of a major alliance of far-right representatives in the European Parliament, I find this quite alarming and disquieting. Now, from a constitutional standpoint, the first part of the volume also considers the still modest role of the European Parliament in the determination of the EU's own resources, as opposed to a co-leading role in relation to expenses. Now, considering the Hamiltonian moment experienced during and by reason of the sanitary crisis, I trust this point will be raised later by one of the speakers. So I'll leave it there. From a legislative perspective, instead, the first part of the book reviews the intense activity of the competent commissions within the European Parliament in the elaboration of rules supporting the creation of a digital single market, and suggests that there is concern for artificial intelligence and its uncontrolled implementation. The first part ends on a more critical note relating to the transparency of the lawmaking process, which is not that surprising given the judicial history of the author of that chapter, Mr. De Capitani, and confident that you have at least heard about him. Now, a certain degree of informality continues actually to characterize trilogue, and greater openness towards citizens is advocated. Can the European Parliament, and if so, to what extent, correct the restrictive attitude of the Council? That's an open question. A number of issues concerning institutional balance here, of course, could be raised, but they probably would require a dedicated webinar. Moving on to the second part briefly of the book, this addresses the relations again between the European Parliament and the national parliaments, and it starts by analyzing the intricate combination of EU and Italian domestic rules, which pinpoints the lack of a uniform electoral system. The impact of Brexit on European elections is also considered for obvious reasons, with the problem it posed in terms of participation by the UK to that election. Also taking into account, of course, the seminal judgment of the Court of Justice in Whitman. Now, from the national perspective, the second part suggests that a significant analogy can be drawn between the progressive empowerment of the European Parliament and that of the domestic parliaments in the making of EU law. Actually, their involvement in the control over the respect of the principle of subsidiarity is quite telling in this regard. While positive, certainly in terms of democracy and transparency, this involvement is nevertheless modest, both for procedural and political reasons. Finally, the participation of national parliaments to the legislative process and to the implementation of EU law, of course, is observed through the lens of the Italian Chamber of Representatives and the Senate. This is also in light of the negative record of infringement procedures against Italy. And it seems that the desire to enhance democratic participation and political dialogue has indeed determined some normative adjustments aimed at making the process more efficient and effective. Right, now to remain in line with the title of the book, I would like to start my brief personal considerations by reminiscing. On 17th of July, 1979, during the first session of the first directly elected European Parliament, Simone Veil, a woman of great determination and exceptional poise, acknowledged that the Parliament was the driving force in European integration. And most notably, she noted that, and I quote, its beginnings were modest and discreet, in keeping with the limited powers conferred on it by the Treaty of Rome. But through the growing political influence it has gradually acquired, the European Parliament has consolidated its role amongst the institutions and in the building of the community. Now, 40 years after the first election by universal suffrage, direct suffrage, I think we can all agree that the European Parliament continues to play today a leading role in the political life of the Union. All too often, however, its contribution to the process of European integration, to the affirmation of the values on which it is based, to the recognition and protection of the rights of individuals is not fully grasped by citizens, not even university students, not at law or political science necessarily either. This is partly why we are here today, I think. The emergence of sovereignism and the resilience of governments that promote a narrative based on Euroscepticism certainly does not foster an adequate dissemination of the added value of a representative parliament with broad legislative powers and effective powers of control over the Commission and the Council. I find the quoted passage of the mentioned opening state particularly noteworthy, not only because Simone Veil was, of course, the first woman president, the second and last for the time being, of course, Nicole Fontaine between 1999 and 2002. I'll get back to Nicole Fontaine at the end of my speech today. But also, and more importantly, I find it noteworthy because on the one side, it sets a clear political agenda, priority, which is still to be discussed and decided. And on the other side, it singles out three challenges ahead, which continue to be before us today. Now, to begin with the political priority, in her opening statement, President Bales claimed that, and I quote, "It is true that the electoral system still vary from one member state to the other, and it will be for us to draw up a uniform electoral system for future election. This is a task to which, along with you, I shall devote my energies." Now, the electoral system is, of course, a delicate matter, as you all know very well. It goes at the core of democratic representation in the EU. And yet, the proposal of a joint constituency and lead candidates appointed for the post of Commission President was not accepted by the Council. But I suspect that the thorny issue of the Spitzenkandidat will be addressed later on, so I will stop here. As to the challenges ahead, President Vail indicated peace, freedom, and prosperity. Peace has been guaranteed, but the nature of threats to peace and stability has certainly not disappeared. On the contrary, they have increased and become more dangerous than ever before. Suffice it here to mention cyber warfare and chemical weapons. Let me focus shortly on the former aspect and remind you that in its resolution of 10th of June 2021, the European Parliament calls for connected products and associated services, including supply chains, to be made secure by time, resilient to cyber incidents, and quickly patched in case of detected vulnerabilities. Cybersecurity requirements for apps, software, embedded software, and operating systems should also be the object of legislation by 2023. Economic freedoms have been effectively promoted. Movement of citizens, workers, services, capitals are at the core of the European integration process and at the center of the European Parliament's attention. Quality and safety standards have been improved. Social rights have gained momentum, and online platforms have rapidly emerged with positive effects on consumer choice, efficiency, and competitiveness in the industry, but also civil participation in society. However, this rapidly evolving reality demands constant monitoring of the respect of fundamental rights, including economic freedoms and possibly normative adjustments. Thirdly, prosperity. Here I shall exercise self-restraint and only hint at the new challenges in light of the Next Generation EU program. Green Deal, Health Union, Stability Pact, immigration policy are all areas where the added value of the supranational dimension is evident. Areas that directly involve the European Parliament, both on the internal and external side. Now, of course, we know that the influence of the European Parliament on the making of European foreign policy has significantly increased with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. But the rest is a matter of will, of occupying spaces. All these challenges show the constitutional thrust of the European Parliament as a political actor. In truth, when facing these challenges, MEPs must uphold and promote fundamental rights and European values, advance the widening and deepening of European integration through legislative compromises, and of course, guarantee interinstitutional balance while doing so. The difficulties in the process of weighing competing prerogatives are certainly exacerbated by the particular heterogeneous composition of the Assembly, but the existence, sharing, and promotion of the same values is of the essence to make any consistent, significant progress. This is why the commitment shown by the European Parliament in advocating the rule of law and demanding respect of fundamental rights throughout the territory of the Union is so important. Notwithstanding some disappointing examples of internal incoherence, the resolution of 8th of July precisely testifies to the resolution, pardon the wordplay, with which MEPs condemn the new anti-LGBTIQ law in Hungary and the rule of law backsliding in that country, and not only in that country. It also confirms that the Parliament is ready to engage the Council on these sensitive topics and the member states, reminding them, for instance, that there is an infringement procedure they can activate under Article 259 TFEU. If I were to offer some key words on the modus operandi of the Parliament now and in the next few years, I would say understanding, influencing, anticipating, and balancing. Understanding. MEPs are progressively required to tackle and manage the growing complexities of the emerging technological, environmental, and social phenomena, promoting prosperity while ensuring freedoms and rights. This evidently poses a flexible, inter- and multidisciplinary approach to lawmaking. Influencing. The EU legal order is based on the principle of conferral. This inevitably limits the scope of cogent EU action and is amid the most ignored factors in the common narrative, most notably the anti-European one. Yet the Parliament is always free to express its position on a given matter, be it genital mutilation or the repression of minority groups in third countries. This puts it in a very different position with respect to that of the Commission when deciding to act on the basis of Article 114 TFEU, de facto allowing the Parliament to influence in some way the decision-making process, contributing to define a common consciousness above and beyond the division of competences that can be found in the treaties. Here, perhaps the case of animal welfare could be made, but I don't have the time to elaborate upon that. Anticipating. This is naturally linked to understanding. Looking ahead for normative gaps in dealing with present and future problems related to technology, climate change, health determinants is also a prerogative of the European Parliament. In October 2020, it urged the Commission to update the EU legal framework governing digital services, which ultimately led to the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act proposals of December 2020. The same can be said actually for artificial intelligence, where the European Parliament issued three very important resolutions on artificial intelligence. And if we look at the package presented by the Commission in 2020, fortunately, if I may add, we find that stance by the Parliament insisting on the central role of humans in the development and implementation of artificial intelligence. Finally, balancing. To continue with an example drawn from the internal market, online platforms are efficient and economically viable. However, they are not risk-free. And the European Parliament has recently asked the Commission to carry out an in-depth analysis of how they shape, filter, and personalize information flows. Algorithmic transparency and accountability in the digital economy and society are paramount. And platforms should be able to be proactive in policing the internet. Just 10 days ago, the European Parliament agreed that digital companies should be able to detect and report child sexual abuse. Yet, this power is somewhat controversial as it poses many problems in terms of privacy. So there again, the problem of balancing. Just a couple of final remarks. The European Parliament is indeed the promoter and gatekeeper of democracy and fundamental rights. In performing this delicate task, MEPs must seek dialogue, cultivate mediation, inspire change, monitor the respect of European values, and hold other institutions, EU agencies and bodies, as well as member states, accountable for their actions or inaction. Compliance with the rule of law is of the utmost importance, not only from an axiological viewpoint, but also in the application of EU substantive law, as exemplified, I think, by the Court of Justice case law on the European arrest warrant. And the European Parliament has certainly proven to be in the trenches when it comes to upholding European identity. Throughout the sanitary crisis, the Parliament has continued to work, and the plenary meetings have finally resumed in Strasbourg. This is in itself, I think, a success story and testifies to the natural physiological resilience of the European project, made of falls and rises. Enough. Allow me, nevertheless, to end with another quotation. this time taken from the address of Nicole Fontaine to the opening session of the Laeken European Council of December 2001. And I quote, "The time has now come to discuss openly all the questions which the citizens of Europe are asking themselves regarding an appropriate blueprint for the future of the Union." Needless to underline how topical this statement is today in light of the ongoing conference on the future of Europe. Different context, certainly, both legal and political. Yet, as Victor Hugo said, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I hope it's come. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Giacomo, for setting the scene so brilliantly. And for those who have joined us, we're now about 62 people online. We are talking about the book that Professor Giacomo de Federico has recently published called Alla, scoperta del Parlamento europeo, Rediscovering the European Parliament, which attempts to look back at the institutional evolution of the European Parliament, take a stock check, if you like, on how important it is today and the role that it plays in the EU political system, and look forward to the future role of the Parliament in a democratic Europe. And to do that, we have a first-rate panel of practitioners and academics to talk about it. And I'm delighted to see everybody there: Elisabetta Gualmini MEP, Sandra Gozzi MEP, Professor Eleanor Spaventa, and Martin Westlake. And it's over to the moderator of this next component of today's event, Professor Gabi Umbach of the European University Institute. Please take it away, Gabi.
Thanks a lot, Anthony, and Giacomo, thanks a lot for talking us through not only the content of your book and the research results that you generated in your research group, but also into the reasoning a bit about the missing elements, and also about something that I found very interesting, the heuristics. So the conceptual approach that you put on your analysis, which indeed helps us to understand the role of the European Parliament a bit better. So the understanding, influencing, balancing, and anticipating as essential functions of the EU. And if we look, having your research in mind, if we look into where we are today with 2019 elections, with the post-COVID recovery, and with the situation that you rightly so outlined for us, increasing contestation, renationalization, Euroscepticism, one indeed can have a look at where we stand now, and you build that bridge in your final words towards where we are today. And Honourable Member Gualmini, Elisabetta, if I might take something up that Giacomo said, this link in between recovery, next generation EU, 2019 election, particularly focusing on the budgetary functions of the EU and the rule of law element. What is your insight, being now part of the body, being MEP? What is the function and the position of the European Parliament, and how would you say it has evolved? And its 2021 position now is with the Recovery Fund and the Next Generation EU.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Gabi, and thank you to everyone. First of all, I hope you can hear me well. So, okay, very well. So, first of all, I think that the book edited by Giacomo di Federico is really an important one, mainly for one reason, because it brings to the light the stronger role of the Parliament after, of course, the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, but also the specific functions and role played by the Parliament itself and in its relationships with national legislative bodies. So we are sort of accustomed to a sort of an intergovernmental bias that according to which, what counts are the states and of course the Commission. And there is always this thinking about the residual role of the European Parliament. Well, this is not true. And indeed, I think that the book spreads some light on that. So I would like to focus on three main issues very briefly. Exactly in line with what you, Gabi, said, and I will make a reference to especially chapters, 2 and 4, by Matteo Bonelli and Cristina Fasone on the European Union budget and on the rule of law. But the first thing will be the role of the Parliament in the last 10 years, also in the response of the pandemic. I think that there is yet an even more powerful role of the Parliament exactly after the health emergency we have observed. Second, there is an innovative role played by the Parliament in the revenue side of the budget, also connected with the response to the crisis. And third, the European Parliament is also a leading actor in the protection of the rule of law and of the fundamental values of the European Union more than any other institutions. And my thesis, which is pretty in line with the book, is that it is the Parliament which drives and stimulates change. So it is not true that this democratic, this unique democratic institution is a residual one, but absolutely it is a drive for change. So first of all, the role of the Parliament during the pandemic. Well, I think that in the last months, we have observed an absolute paradigm shift produced by the health emergency. So I think that we have really assisted in an incredible disruption, full of never expected expectations and innovations. We have seen a higher integration among the different European institutions, cooperation among them, and the will to respond in a solidaristic way to the needs of citizens, companies, and families. And, you know, from Next Generation EU to the investments made in the research for the vaccines and so on and so forth, of course, the Commission has played an important role, but it has been the Parliament that has pushed, checked, monitored all the process, because it is MPs who go into, you know, the territories and speak to the people about their needs. So in this case, the role of the Parliament has been really very important. Second, the redesign of the revenue side. In the book, we are told that there is a sort of an asymmetry between the revenue side of the budget and the expenditure, the expenses side one. So the role of the Parliament is pretty limited in the own resource, you know, process of decision, whereas it is more important in the expenditures momentum. I think that this is not completely true. Of course, there are rules provided by the treaties, but I think that the innovation we have put in place in order to finance the costs and the interest rates of the recovery fund by introducing a binding calendar for new own resources for the very first time in the history of the European integration is really a huge novelty. And we have basically said, as members of the Parliament, that we didn't want to accept the MFF if the revision and the full reform of the own resources wasn't put in place. And we have obtained a very strict calendar. So just to mention some examples, the CBAM, the ETS reform, the digital levy by 2023, the financial transaction tax and corporate tax by 2026, and so on and so forth. These are ambitious and revolutionary deadlines on which the Parliament has to monitor. Finally, as for the Europe of values and rights, this time we as MPs have really asked the Commission and the states to really link the delivery of European funds and European financial resources to the respect of the rule of law. Last December, a new regulation was voted by, and a new agreement was put in place, in which we say we won't give any money to Hungary and Poland and to the other member states, but especially to the member states which have many problems with the respect of democratic values if we are not sure that these values are respected. And it is not for the case that now the analysis of the national plan presented by Orban is being, discussed. So the Commission is taking time in order to check if really the financial resources, we are talking of 7 billion euros for Hungary, will be used in a proper way. So it has been the Parliament which has asked for a new regulation on this kind of conditionality. So I'm very happy to say that the book is right. The role of the Parliament is growing and growing. Maybe because there is a strict link between the democratic nature of the Parliament and the capacity to drive and move policy change. Why? Because we speak with our electors and with our citizens. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Elisabeth. And that's a very interesting point, the last one you mentioned, the link between the democratic nature, representative nature of the European Parliament and it itself becoming more and more of a change driver, especially in the recovery period. And if we look into this recovery period, actually, we see that it seems that the impact of the Parliament on content increases, which potentially could lead to some interinstitutional effects as well, as, for example, the Spitzenkandidaten procedure that Giacomo mentioned. Honourable Member Gozi, Sandro, how would you reflect on these institutional interlinkages and obviously on any other thing that you want to reflect on in the book?
This handbook, can you hear me? It's okay? Yeah. I was saying that, I mean, thank you for the invitation and congratulations again to Giacomo di Federico, because I think this textbook is good and timely. Is good because it tackles some key aspects of the role of the European Parliament, of the nature of the European Parliament, which are not necessarily very well known. I don't say from the public opinion, but sometimes not even in the academic circles. And I think that this is this is the first reason why I think it's a very useful contribution. I think, I mean, Elisabetta Gualmini already touched upon very important aspect, but I think that beyond the history of the Assembly, but to link the role of the European Parliament with fundamental values, to the digital transition, to the issue of transparency, to the issue of subsidiarity, are all very, very useful analysis and new contribution. The second is, reason why I think this text was very useful is that it raised some key political and institutional aspect, mainly linked to the European electoral process. And I guess that you want me to dwell about this aspect, which is, I mean, the most institutional and political aspect, and which was already mentioned before in the introduction, referring to the issue of Spitzenkandidaten. And on that, I mean, I'm going to be very clear. I think that will help the debate. As you know, I've been dealing not from the academic point of view, but as a politician now. I was in the forefront of these proposals. It was Italy who, when I was a member of the Italian government, who resumed the proposal of transnational list, an old proposal of the European Parliament, but we resumed it just after Brexit, when I was in Bratislava at the informal General Affairs Council in July 2016, an informal council which was convened to discuss the institutional and political effects of Brexit. It was my proposal to put on the table again the transnational list. This time it was, I thought it would have been less difficult, because whereas until Brexit in the proposed European Parliament, we were asking each member state to renounce to a certain number of MEP elected in the national constituencies. With Brexit, we had at disposal 73 seats to be used as we wished. And this is why I relaunched this transnational list proposal. I found a very determined and convinced ally in Emmanuel Macron during the presidential election and after as president. And with our colleague now, Nathalie Loiseau, who is sitting with Elisabetta and myself in the European Parliament, we tried to convince the European Parliament in 2018 to approve the transnational list. And we failed. We failed because of the opposition of the extremists from left and right, but notably because of the position of the European People's Party, and also of some concern of small delegation coming from small member states, which were wrongly concerned about the demographic aspect. And if you want in the debate, I will tell you why this concern was wrong and why we are tackling now in the European Parliament. We are again working on this issue in this midterm. And I mean, the issue of demographic balance is perfectly possible to ensure demographic balance between big country and small country. But the key point was the political suicide of Manfred Weber, because after all, we were very clear. So it's not that France opposed the system of Spitzenkandidaten, as it has been said. We were very clear since 2018, and even clearer during the electoral campaign in 2019. We thought that the first attempt of Spitzenkandidaten, of the head of list candidate in 2014, was a very good attempt, because it was following a trend for at least 2 or 3 terms. The European People's Party had claimed that as party having the relative majority, it was supposed to express the president of the Commission. It is one of the reasons why José Manuel Durão Barroso was elected and confirmed as president of the Commission. Not the only reason, but one of the first reasons was the EPP was claiming to be, a group which had the relative majority. In 2014, we introduced this political link between, the candidates selected by the European political parties and the post of the European Commission. Was a first attempt, but it needed to be developed because the solution of 2014 is certainly not satisfactory. What was the natural development? The natural development was to introduce the transnational list and to indicate the number 1 of the list as the woman or the man who was the candidate of that party to the presidency of the European Commission. The transnational lists were rejected, and we thought that to propose again the Spitzenkandidaten system was a fiction, because in 2014 it was okay to launch this process. In 2019, it was clear that if you want to have the head of the list, you must have the list. So, it is impossible to talk about an head of the list system without the list. And we said, Manfred Weber, strange that the opposition comes from the European People's Party, because according to the polls, you could be the beneficiary of this, and now you are going to be the victim. And it has been so. Because it is clear that since the very beginning, we said that we wouldn't have presented a Spitzenkandidaten because we couldn't continue with the fiction of having a head of the list without the list. And that was the story. I'm telling you in a very blunt manner, but after all, I went on the French TV on the 28th of May, reminding clearly that the position of En Marche, of Renaissance, was clearly that we didn't think that we were in any case bound by the indication of Manfred Weber as EPP candidate. Today, I think that we have turned the page. There are real discussion, and there is also a real discussion also within the European People's Party about this issue, and we want to be constructive. We are working in the Constitutional Affairs Committee we renew S&D, the Greens, but I mean, we want really to listen to the real concern of the EPP. We want to modify the electoral law in order to meet the concern on one hand, on the other hand, in order to be able to double the democratic choice of the citizens in 2014. We would like, we know that it's difficult, but we will work until the end, until the very last useful minute to do so. We want to double the democratic choice and powers of the European citizens. We want to give them two ballot lists. One, the first one for the national constituency, one, and the second one for the European constituency. Every voter must have two ballots, with the party running in the national constituency, with the European political party running in the European constituency. Why? And I end here. I conclude. Why this is important? This is important for the issue which Giacomo Di Federico raises in his book, the issue of legitimacy, the issue of democratic legitimacy of the European Parliament, the issue of giving the Parliament a real political visibility, which is the precondition to have a real political awareness among the public opinion, among the voters, among the citizens, of what the European Parliament already today represent, and what can further represent in the future. And the last point, and I'm talking to you as Secretary General of the European Democratic Party, so I'm talking against my interest. Today, the European political parties are not real parties. They do little politics. Sometimes they're not even European. But one of the reasons is that, I mean, they are confederation of national political parties. They are not truly European political movement. They will become truly political movement at the day where the citizens will be able to vote them directly. And this will be a major contribution to increase the visibility of the European Parliament, major contribution to increase the political awareness of the citizens around the European dimension of politics, and it will also a major step to build up a European transnational political space. It won't be the silver bullet. The transnational list won't solve all the problem, but it will be a little reform which could provoke a substantial improvement to build up a truly European democratic sphere.
Thank you very much, Sandro. That's a very interesting point. Actually, you take the alpha of the book in a way, so the 1979 election reform, and 40 years on, say, okay, we're now here and we need to make it future-proof, but also representing our current reality, because what it can do, it can increase visibility, it can increase representativeness. Obviously, it can increase support. People can feel that this is one of the participatory tools. And above all, it can increase transparency. It has a systemic contribution to make to the EU and the interplay of the institutions. And with this transparency in mind, and also the systemic element, Eleanor, what is your take on what has been said so far, but particularly maybe the focus on this transparency? What can the European Parliament add to the systemic transparency within the EU, and hence towards the support, the public support that can be generated through transparency?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event, and thank you, Giacomo, very much for a very interesting book, which, you know, I might not, naturally being an academic, I might not agree with all that is argued, but I surely found it very stimulating. And I would like to build up a bit on what MEPs Gozzi and Gualmini were saying, which I found very interesting also. You know, clearly this discussion that is a reflection about what the European Parliament has done and how it has grown in importance, but also where should we be going to make it a more functional institution? Not a more functional institution, I think actually it's very functional, but an institution that is better connected with local realities. And before offering a few thoughts about transparency, if I will have time, I've found what MEP Gualmini was saying about the paradigm shift incredibly interesting, and I think it emerges from the book as well. And here I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I think this paradigm shift actually is visible in a very powerful way already with Brexit. And I found the role of the European Parliament during the Brexit negotiations incredibly strong, and not so much. I mean, what I was really impressed, and of course, from my perspective, positively impressed with was the ability of the European Parliament to give a voice to citizens who were badly affected by Brexit, both the British citizens in Europe, sorry, and the EU citizens in the UK. And I was living in the United Kingdom then, and I can say that actually that was not done by the Westminster Parliament. And so really the European Parliament became a very successful chamber to amplify justified concerns of citizens badly affected by Brexit. And so much so that it was clear that the European Parliament's consent to the withdrawal agreement was linked to the treatment of citizens. And for me, that was an amazing moment of the Parliament at its best, doing what it was there to do to protect actually the citizens that had elected them. And this paradigm shift whereby the European Parliament, in my opinion, used its basically veto power in anticipation to influence what was going on, then continued with Next Generation EU, again in a very successful manner. It seems to me that as Elisabetta Golmini said, it has fostered a sort of space for more meaningful dialogue between the three institutions when there is a major constitutional crisis, because both Brexit and COVID have triggered a major constitutional crisis, not least because of the problem of competences in Next Generation EU. So I found the change. In fact, I found this so interesting that I advertised and got a postdoc just to do research on how this paradigm shift is going to affect governance in the European Union. And building also on what Sandro Gozzi was saying, and to a certain extent what Elisabetta Golmini was saying, and what comes quite strongly out from the book is this problem of what in the 90s was called in academia the democratic deficit of the European Union. So this fact that we have institutionally, actually we are quite well designed, but there is a lack of contact between the citizen and the institution. And again, I think this is much more of a problem of a sort of media bias whereby they can identify clearly the Commission presidents, now the European Council presidents, what the member states want, and they are less active in seeking what the position within the European Parliament are, also because it's very difficult to explain in lay terms, I think, what is the exact role of the European Parliament. So there I put the blame a bit more on the media. And I was wondering, as Sandro Gozzi was speaking about the future, I really like the idea of the transnational political parties, transnational lists. I think it is essential to create that link that we were discussing between citizen, commission, and so on. And I have two thoughts. First of all, constitutionally it's not going to be so then but you know, that's what researchers are for. This distinction between the national and European constituency is not going to be an easy one, I think, to draw, because do these people who will originate anyway from national political parties, will they be linked to national political parties? Will they have a different role in the European Parliament and so on? But this is details. I have a question more about the Spitzenkandidaten and this linking to the transnational list, because we know, and this goes back to another theme that is raised in the book, the rule of law backsliding. We know that the Juncker Commission did not bring proceedings, or did not trigger Article 7 in relation to Hungary, and we know that this was because of the link with the PPE. So I can see, I wonder whether, when we think about this direct link between Parliament and Commission, which of course is beneficial in democratic terms, whether we have to reflect also on what it means, given that the powers that are given to the Commission in the treaties very much build on an idea of a technocrat Commission. So what I worry is that there might be an evolution that is not as organic as we would like it to be. In the moment in which we introduce this new sort of direct link between, of course there is already a direct link, but a more direct link between Parliament and Commission. And I don't know if I've run out of time, maybe Gabby, maybe we want to go to, and then if anything we can discuss, because I don't want to take too much time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And thank you also for raising these systemic questions, because actually I want to bring something to Martin's attention that throughout all the presentations shine through in a way. So in a way. So Giacomo was citing Simone Weil with the driving force of European integration. Elisabetta then was seeing the EP as a change driver in difficult times, but also common consciousness, the representation of common consciousness, with what Eleanor said, in a way, the amplifying justified concerns of citizens and giving that a floor, plus also what Sandro said about the institution in which we can still institutionally engineer change that brings citizens more within the system. Looking at the EP from that perspective, from zooming out in that more systemic perspective, what do you take from the book? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you very much, Gabby, and congratulations to Professor Di Federico and his contributing authors for an excellent piece of work, a very interesting piece of work, and a very timely book indeed. Gabby, to answer your question, I'd like, if I may, to make a couple of general observations which answer your question. And I'd also like to consider, to some extent, an unforeseen and growing challenge for the European Parliament. My first observation is that the Parliament is, by its vocation, a federalizer. The logic of the Parliament's existence is some form of European federalism. It can only legislate at a federal level. It can only approve a federal budget. It can only appoint and approve at the level of the EU, and it can only hold to account at the EU level. So there will always be a natural tension between these federalizing instincts and the national political systems of the member states, which have a completely different logic and dynamic. And it's not by chance, as described by Michele Macchi and Lucrezia Ranieri in the first chapter of the book, that it took quite so long for the first direct elections to the European Parliament to take place. Professor Di Federico quoted Victor Hugo, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But the fact is that the European Parliament, a directly elected European Parliament, is a very powerful idea. And it's no surprise, therefore, that it took quite so long to take place. On the other hand, it is surprising how often the other institutions and the actors in them forget that essential vocation. Often one hears the Parliament being described as exaggerating or being awkward or being unreasonable, but actually from the Parliament's point of view, it is being consistent, perfectly consistent and coherent with its vocational its federal vocation. And indeed, we have heard some examples of that today from Onorevole Gualmini and Onorevole Gozzi. My second observation is that increasingly, as I see it, the Parliament is becoming the Union's social and political conscience. Now, I don't mean that only in relation to the rule of law mechanism described in Chapter 2 in the book by Matteo Bonelli, and also Onorevole Gualmini touched on the point. I also mean it more generally in terms of the EU's economic and financial policies, where member states in the Council naturally tend to put economic and financial interests first, and in external areas like trade and foreign policy, where member states tend again towards favouring economic and financial interests, and maybe I'm being a little harsh and unfair, but they tend to favour realpolitik over idealism. The Parliament, of course, is aware of all of those interests, but it is also the arch defender of the EU's fundamental values, as Professor Di Federico was mentioning, as set out in Articles 2 and 3 of the Treaty on European Union. So if you look at issues like sustainable development, social progress, minority rights, gender equality, solidarity between generations, cultural diversity, fair trade, the eradication of poverty, the European Parliament is now the champion of all of those values of the European Union. And what it means is that whenever a legislative proposal is tabled, Parliament will be insistent that those values are reflected and respected. And whenever a cooperation agreement or a trade agreement is being negotiated, sorry, the Parliament will be hovering over the negotiators' shoulders to make sure that, as I see the logic of Article 3, to ensure that the EU's regulatory might is turned into an outward extension of the EU's fundamental values. And once again, this means that there's always going to be a natural tension between the Union's conscience and its interests, as I've narrowly defined them. Now, traditionally, those in the EU's institutional arrangements, those tensions have been played out between the Parliament and the Council of Ministers, as indeed foreseen by Article 14 of the Treaty on the European Union. And since 1979, as the book really sets out, the European Parliament, as part of the evolving European Union, has made extraordinary progress in asserting its role and its powers vis-à-vis the Council in particular. I mean, I'm showing my age here, but prior to the adoption of the Single European Act, it was quite frequent to hear here in Brussels the description of the EU's decision-making procedures as being the Commission proposes, the Council disposes. One can't imagine it now. I mean, the Parliament is now undeniably and completely the twin arm of the budgetary and legislative authorities of the European Union. Moreover, if von der Leyen's promise about the right of initiative materializes after the conference on the future of the Europe, the Parliament will also be proposing as well as jointly disposing. But now I move on to this challenge where I would be particularly interested in hearing from our honourable parliamentarians about how they see things. The 2008 sovereign debt crisis resulted in something unexpected happening, in the sense that the European Council, which was expected to meet twice every 6 months according to the treaty articles, started meeting much more frequently, and as Herman van Rompuy has described in various books and articles, it had to meet more frequently because only the heads of state or government could take such momentous financial decisions as were necessary at the time. And quite simply, the European Council has got into the habit of meeting frequently, and I'm being a bit facetious, the European Union has got into the habit of facing major crises. So we had the migration crisis, the occupation of Crimea, the Brexit referendum, the election of Donald Trump and his aggressive behavior, and they all necessitated guidance from the European Council. More recently, of course, we've had the COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying economic challenges. And in the middle of all of that, we had, of course, the July 2020 European Council meeting on the multi-annual financial framework and the next generation EU recovery instrument. All of this means that the European Council has been much more active and much more authoritative, maybe, than was expected. with, as a consequence, a diminution in the role of the Council of Ministers, which until 2008 was the primary interlocutor of the European Parliament. Now, of course, we know that the treaties forbid the European Council from being involved in the legislative procedure, but nevertheless, increasingly the European Council seems to be imposing fait accompli, which it is difficult for the European Parliament to deal with, because the European Council is not its interlocutor and it is not part of the legislative procedure. So I was particularly interested by what Elisabetta Gualmini said about the timeline for an own resources decision that the Parliament has managed to impose, which seems to me a clear example of the Parliament fighting back against this new and perhaps growing challenge. So perhaps I'll leave it there, Gabi.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Martin. And what I would like us to do is to first give the floor to Giacomo to react on what you've heard, and then open the floor to the questions and also to the panelists to react. Plus, as you see on the right-hand lower side of your screen, you can raise any questions you want, and Joanna will come in to moderate the chat and will put the questions forward to the panel. Yeah, Giacomo, please.
Thank you, Gabi. Thank you very much. Thank you to all for the very interesting comments. I will try to react just as three brief reactions. To begin with, Honorable Member Gualmini, I really appreciated a lot the link between MEPs and the territory, because this is something we don't talk about enough. Going back to constituencies and promoting what has been done and listening, this is essential. This is also touches upon, this raises a number of questions, also dealing with transnational lists. How will we keep that going with the complications derived from languages and cultures? Of course, this is, however, at the same time, the added value, because this would allow, here I go to what Sandro Gozzi was saying, it has the ability to trigger a positive reaction on the part of the citizens, a better understanding of what is going on, a better understanding of the citizens' role with respect to the European Parliament. So promoting a European culture, and that is actually what the European Parliament, as we said today, is doing. I am fascinated by the proposal on the 2 ballots, because I think what this would determine, it would break up the fiction that is in the political narrative now, that tends to keep on 2 completely different level, the national level on one side and the European level on the other. And this breaks it. This also makes it more difficult for national political parties to shuffle the cards. And where we find a certain alliances at the national level, we don't see them at the European level. We find a number of contradictions in the political stances adopted, again, at a national level and then at the EU level. And finally, I also would, yes, one of the things that I also appreciate of Anno Spaventa's intervention was, yes, this idea about institutional balance, which has been in some way struggling to find a proper solution. Because here, what we have, I think, if we forget the original role, what we have, this is what Martin was insisting upon. We have European Council with more powers, and what that indicates is also that we kind of lost track of the original genius idea, which was to attribute the initiative to the Commission, that is the guardian of the treaties, and that by reason of the treaties only works in the interest of the EU. if you move the power of initiative to the European Council, you've lost that. You've lost a major pillar of the EU lawmaking process as it was originally imagined. And I think there are good reasons for that. Now, of course, to apply to things have gone in different directions. But I do, for the moment, just would like to stress the importance of reflecting upon these adjustments and the consequences and the impact that it can have. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Giacomo, which gives us the possibility and the option, the time to bring that back to the panel. So the, if you so wish, distortion of the institutional balance as foreseen by the treaties in between the three institutions due to the European Council's transformation, crisis-related transformation. And I want to bring that back to both you, Elisabetta and Sandro. Elisabetta, what is your view on that? If we look at the European Council and how it evolved within and from the crisis, will that have an impact on the interrelation between the Parliament and the Council of Ministers in the legislative process? Do you see any issues there?
Yeah, I think so. So there has been really an evolution also within the council, and I think that, for instance, the compromise that was, taken and signed at the end of July last year in order to, promote the next generation EU really marked a turning point in the history of the European Union, because there was the political will to overcome the veto points of, the northern states, which are always not so much inclined towards Keynesian policies, and it was able to overcome also the, the veto points of the Visegrad group, which was also not so much in favor of transparency rules and, of course, the rule of law. So there was a jump in the history because I think that there was the understanding that this was really the very last train for the European Union to catch, in order to demonstrate that the European Union is not only a hyper bureaucracy very far from citizens, but it is also, I wouldn't say a political community, but a community which has also to enter into the concrete lives of our citizens. So, of course, Europe is still a Europe of nations. So I wouldn't say that we have arrived, or we have achieved an ever closer Europe. But again, these evolutions and this higher integration in response to the crisis has positively affected also the interinstitutional links and connections, and positively affected the role of, the Parliament. And also, I would say there has been some other phenomena very interesting from a political science point of view. For instance, also the, the barrier against sovereignism and anti-Europeism. So the alliance between the Europeanist parties was absolutely stronger and stronger, and there really we had the idea that the time had come for really have a closer union and a Europe which is able to say something against national selfishness and national egoisms. And the very last thing, we haven't mentioned that we had three female leaders, in charge for this, for what I have called the paradigm shift. So really we have to say that Ursula von der Leyen and Angela Merkel in the first semester, when she was in charge during the crisis, and of course Christine Lagarde. So three iron ladies, three very determined women, always perfect, always with a perfect hair, especially Ursula von der Leyen. So really they had, it was nice to see these women in charge. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elisabetta, for the view also on the overall transformative part. And Sandro, what is your view on the balance in between European Council and Parliament for the future? Will that be reversed? Is that something that is only now a crisis reflex, an institutional reflex from the institutions, from the leaders of the member states? Will the Parliament be able to regain its position in vis-à-vis the Council?
I think that the European Council is the biggest institutional and political problem we have in the EU political system. And I think that there has been really a drift since the Treaty of Lisbon of the role of the European Council. I think that to turn the European Council into an institution was a major mistake, strongly wanted by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who had this idea since he launched the European Summit in Rambouillet in 1975, that, I mean, that was the place of political Europe. And I think that it is polluting the EU political system. I was very clear also in a working document, which I've done in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, where I say the things, so I mean, I don't have any problem to repeat them to you. The European Council is a big problem because it is slowly changing the community system. Since the European Council decided to go beyond its very important role as political guidance, its very important role as institution which provide the political orientations, which make the key political choices in the medium and long term, and it has decided to turn into a sort of permanent intergovernmental conference at the highest level on everything. It is hampering the efficiency of the European political system. It is clear that the fact that any single political issue which is difficult to tackle at ministerial European level, any thorny issue, any issue which is political sensitive, the fact that, I mean, the trend now is that it goes up to the European Council, it is polluting the system because everything also we could decide by qualified majority voting and an ordinary legislative procedure, they called the old co-decision with the European Parliament, it becomes a matter to be decided by consensus. And this also, it is a problem. It is a problem which is a result of political choice, because Van Rompuy first and Donald Tusk after decided that that was the way forward, decided that the European Council had to gain some room, decided that this room had to be again at the expenses of the European Commission, and decided to put a parallel system to prepare and implement the European Council decision. And this parallel system is what I call Sherpacracy. We talk a lot about technocracy, nobody talk about the Sherpacracy. And the Sherpacracy is a knot that we have to cut off of the European political system. My former colleague diplomats are thrilled about being Sherpa. There are even politicians that started to be Sherpa. In the previous term, there were member of the European Parliament, which was very proud to be the Sherpa of the European Parliament, discussing with Sherpa of the national government. So basically, elected people by the citizens were happy to discuss with faceless diplomats and technocrats instead of keeping the level at the right democratic level. And basically, institutionally, there is one single formation of the Council which should be there to prepare and to implement the conclusion of the European Council, which is the General Affairs Council. By the way, it's the only formation of the Council which is explicitly mentioned in the Treaty of Lisbon. The other formation of the Council of Ministers are not mentioned. The General Affairs Council is explicitly mentioned. And basically, you got a parallel system where on one side, you got the General Affairs Council, on the other side, you got Sherpa. And as the Sherpa are the Conseillers du Prince, because they got the office near the prime minister, because they got the office near Monsieur le Président, because they got the office near Frau die Bundeskanzlerin, they always prevail over the General Affairs Council. That means that we have less transparency, we got less efficiency, we got less parliamentary scrutiny, because we can convene a European minister holding the presidency, rotating presidency, we can convene him or her before the European Parliament. Because when I was a member of national parliament, when I was a member of the national government, I was regularly convened by the Italian Parliament to explain why we took certain decisions and to explain what we were going to do. When you shift to a parallel system with lack of transparency, of diplomat, advisor, you take a step backward. Instead of going towards more political accountability, more democratic transparency, we are taking a step backward. And this is the problem around the European Council. It is a problem of efficiency, a problem of transparency, a problem of inadequate implementation of the Treaty of Lisbon. And I know that, I mean, and now it is done, you will say, what could we do? We have to do what is possible to do according to the treaty. We have to give to the President of the European Commission also the function of President of the European Council. We have to give the President of the European Commission the possibility to convene the European Council, to chair the meetings, and to ensure the preparation and the follow-up. Because this is the only way through which we can reduce the bureaucratic pollution, and we can try to regain, as a European Parliament and also as national parliament, some real democratic scrutiny. I'm not afraid about the risk. Some people say, no, if we do that, it is the European Commission which becomes totally a secretary of the European Council. No, I'm not scared of that. And I think that also that goes back to what I was saying. A president of the European Commission elected as head of the list, of the transnational list, will have a strong political and democratic legitimacy to ensure that the system will work properly. And as my friend Martin Westlake, which I'm very happy to see again, as I know him since a long time, I won't mention the year in which I met Martin. As he said, the European Parliament is a federalizer. The European Parliament has a role only on what is federal, and I'm not scared of using the F word, because I mean there is a part of the system which is also federal, and the European Parliament should push toward the direction I've just shared with you, in my view.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all of you, to Martin for raising the issue, and to both of you, and to Giacomo for elaborating on that. I do think that this, from the systemic point of view, is one of the points to indeed really watch for the institutional balance within the European Union and for the role of the Parliament within it. I now would like, because I see some question coming in, Jana, to go over to give the floor to you to summarize a bit what is going on in the chat and to put some questions.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I would like, though, to take the opportunity to thank all the speakers. It was really fascinating listening to all of you. Your presentation was so full of key messages about EU politics and very concrete. This is really was the pleasure of listening to all of you, how to really make European citizenship truly European, ensure better balance also between the institutions, and also bring about better also democratic scrutiny for always improving and increasing legitimacy. So I have a question here from Antoine Ripoli. What could the EP do to be better known and its political role more valued by EU citizens? It continues, should it communicate better? And if yes, how? Should it rather push also more towards transnational lists and other political ways to get a higher legitimacy, therefore? So please, first to you.
Shall I
Absolutely.
answer? I don't
Yes,
know.
please.
Oh, okay.
You can take turns, in
brief.
fact, because I think it touches a bit on everyone.
Very briefly, actually, I didn't mention, maybe we didn't mention the conference on the future of Europe. So this is a very important initiative, very much wanted and encouraged by David Sassoli, so the current president of the European Parliament. And really the goal of the Conference on the Future of Europe is to communicate and inform citizens about what the European institutions are doing, and especially the Parliament. And there is also a digital platform which has been already built up, so I think it's working already. And this platform will allow citizens or groups of citizens to participate and to propose and suggest issues that have to be discussed during this conference. And also there will be plenary sessions in which some representatives of the citizens eventually will take part. And so the idea is not, unfortunately, the one to change immediately the treaties, even if we hope that we will do this in the future, for instance, by limiting the veto powers of the states. But it is a good starting point at this conference in order to communicate in a better way about the EU.
Thank you. Maybe Sandro Gozzi, would you like to come in on this also, please?
Yes, I think that, I mean, I totally agree about the conference. We'll come back also to the conference. I think that to be better known, we need what we just said, and I will continue relentlessly to talk about direct election, transnational lists, and so on and so forth, because we need to switch from 27 national debates toward a more European debate. Mm-hmm. And for that we need political evolutions and institutional developments. And then we need a good, healthy political fight. We need good fight because only when the citizens see a clear political cleavage, clear political fight, they start to get to get an interest. The media start to get an interest. And what is difficult to do in this original system is to let emerge clearly who does what and who fights for what, and what are the political cleavages, because you got cleavages which are along partisan, national lines, both a mixture of both, and ideological lines within the European Parliament, but then you got another kind of competition between the three institutions. And this makes it much more difficult to detect, to interpret, to read the system for the citizens. So this is why we would need on some key issues strong, a good, healthy political fight in order to let the citizens to take side on one side or the other side. Paradoxically, I would say that the conflict which is emerging about what are the what the European values are, and what we should do or should not do to defend the rule of law, to defend freedom of press, to defend freedom of expression, to defend freedom of education, universities, etc. That can help to show that there are real political fights in our system that could catch the interest of the media, and that also would put a stronger light on the European Parliament. The other issue is certainly what we can do with this conference of the future of Union. It was proposed by Emmanuel Macron on the 4th of March 2019. We have pushed during the electoral campaign, as Elisabetta Gualmini said, David Sassoli joined forces to push for this. And I think that there, again, we see another paradox, because after all, we have launched a process of direct participatory democracy, which doesn't have any precedent in the history of our democracies, which is built upon the cases of the Irish referenda, of the French Climate Citizens Convention, but it has never been done at European scale. Never we have selected randomly 400 citizens to discuss with the representatives of the citizens. Never we have put online a platform multilingual, and each of us can address the platform in his or her own languages. But I mean, the platform is basically an unknown, non-flying object. Nobody knows that the platform exists. And there again, I mean, how can we push the media? I mean, why the TV national public service, which are paid in many countries by the taxpayers, doesn't devote 30 seconds of the 8 hours news in the evening to say, hello, you know, there is this conference, this platform exists. Each of you could subscribe, could register. And this conference will debate about the future of Europe. I mean, this is something that, I mean, requires a sort of cooperation by the media and by the major media, and also requires specific action on the social network. I want to hope, and this is my very last point, that when the women and men selected randomly will physically start to work, there will be stories to tell. There will be journalists with camera who say, Mrs. Dupont, you have been selected, you are here, tell us why did you accept, tell us what you want from Europe, tell us what you hate of Europe. And I hope that at least they can build up stories that raise the awareness and increase the information on this conference.
Thank you so much, Sandro. And I really agree with you about it. That really the mainstream media, I mean, really a spot like at 8 o'clock in the evening when people are watching TV for the news, I mean, it would be really, I think, very good to really draw awareness and empower, in fact, the citizens to really come in and use this opportunity, because I think it's really amazing, this Agora possibility that is offered through the Conference of Europe. Maybe I pass the floor also to Eleonora Spaventa and then Martin Westlake before I give the last word to the author. So in view of this kind of question and maybe any additional comments related to it that they would like to add. So please, Eleanor.
Thank you very much. And I'm finding this discussion very interesting, especially on this role, the changing role of the European Council that, yeah, is linked to emergencies and obviously to the institutional inability of the European Union to deal with major crises, and the sovereign debt crisis was the first one in which we noticed that. I was, just reacting quickly to what Sandro was saying. The national governments could have done much more to advertise the conference on the future of Europe. I'm sorry, but when they want, they have all this advertising, from vaccination to when they have an important point that they want to press, they just buy time on national TV, social media, and so on, and they do it. And so to lay all this blame, I mean, I'm critical, as I said before, on certain, I think, media practices. But to say it is simply their role when actually the national sphere is not pushing this as the Agora moment, as the public debate moment, I think, let's lay the blame where the blame lies. And I think it lies with national parliaments, national governments, which could have done much more. I was just looking at the numbers, and they're depressingly low. So far there are about 10,900. Given that we are 450 million people, that's negligible so far. But I hope it will be this transformative moment that we wish it to be, and we hope it will be in a way. I guess is also stemming from the experience in Ireland, which was incredibly positive in that respect of citizens' assemblies. I mean, really managed to unblock one of the main political problems in Ireland, which was abortion. So I do hope it will work. Maybe I'm a bit less optimistic, but I do hope it will work.
Thank you so much. Martin, maybe you would like to comment on this?
Thank you, Joanna. Unsurprisingly, I agree with everything that's been said so far. and rather boringly. I particularly agree with Sandro that the Parliament needs more fights, but it has to be on the right side and pick its fights. I mean, I'm repeating what I've said in a previous conference for some of the participants today, but I personally believe that the Parliament missed a trick by not censoring the Commission during the mad cow crisis, where there was a clear smoking gun and the Parliament would have been clearly on the side of the people. So I agree entirely that fights between the Parliament and the other institutions, particularly the Commission, raise awareness, of course, about all of the institutions, but the role of the Parliament in particular. And it comes back to what I was saying about the Parliament being increasingly becoming the conscience of the European Union. And having said that, though, people don't vote for parliaments, they vote for parties. And therefore, I find Sandro's arguments about transnational lists particularly convincing, because people have to be given the opportunity of voting for European political parties and not for national political parties that are part of European party groupings, if I can put it like that. And so far, what they see in European elections is national political parties, mainly national politicians. And so they don't get the fundamental message that the Parliament is there as their friend, and in it are their political parties for which they voted.
Thank you so much. And now I pass the floor to the author himself. So Giacomo, please, you have the last word before I pass the floor back to Gabi.
Thank you very much. Last consideration is that if we agree, and I do agree with Sandro Gozzi, that we need fights, we also need the instruments to fight. And I think that is education. And I speak for myself in my experience, and I teach EU law at people who are 21, 22, fourth year in university. They've made up their mind on pretty much everything. So what we need to do is to explain the EU system well before then. Now, this is, of course, outside the EU competences. Education remains primarily a responsibility of the member states, but to include education on and information on how the EU works, this is essential, because one of the things that I think is going to emerge from the conference is that a number of observations will concern areas that fall outside the competences. So at the end, what we have is a lot of frustration and criticism, which is what I read in the news, for what the EU cannot do. So basically, paradoxically, if we look at the narrative, then paradoxically, people many times seem to be asking for more Europe, not less Europe. So, but Europe can't do anything about it. So Europe takes the blame simply because people are not aware of what the Union can do, and possibly not even what it should be. So I think this is what, but this is what we have addressed today, I think. And I'm only arguing that we should anticipate the moment where we get the new generations involved in this political process, so they are capable to autonomously reason and decide, and therefore take up those fights that Sandro Gozzi was mentioning. That'll be it for me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you all very much.
And thank you also. We are now a bit over time, so Gabi, please, pass the floor to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jana, and thanks to all of you for discussing the European Parliament in such a new and very productive way. Because if I go back to the starting point, Giacomo, what you did is actually what we wanted to do is to look where did we come from with the Parliament, right? So we saw we've come a long way, already had part of the way very successfully in our bags, but we still have a lot in front if we look into what the Parliament needs to transform into and what needs to be transformed for the Parliament to really become a representative institution that we want it to be in the EU's political system. If we look at the Conference for Europe, and I would say your book does a bit more on contribution than you now said with your educational momentum. Actually, your book with the 4 elements, with the EP understands, it influences, it anticipates and balances. These are actually good points for people who want to engage in the conference on the future of Europe to reflect upon. What do I want the Parliament to do to be more able to understand, to anticipate better, to influence better, and also to balance better? So a bit a shopping list and also a to-do list for those that want to engage in the Conference of Europe. And I just can recommend anyone to push people, to mobilize people, to contribute to that, and also to reflect upon where in this functional matrix do I want the Parliament to become more strong and stronger and more influential within the political system. Having said that, actually this is a mobilizer for more activities over the summer to engage in the platform, to contribute to the conference. Giacomo, our warmest thanks to you and congratulations to the book, also from my side to your research group. Actually, we are very happy to close this year's first cycle of EPRS events. We're happy to see you back then in fall after the summer break. Continue working for the European Parliament. It's an excellent cause within the system of the European Union. And Anthony, do you have any other final words to say at that point?
Well, very, very last words. Thank you to everybody who's put this together and everybody who's spoken today. It's been great, really great conversation. Thank you to Giacomo, of course. Thank you to Elisabetta, to Sandro, to Eleanor, to Martin, to Gabby, to Anna. We discovered a new word, namely shapocracy, which I'll certainly be using, and I think captures in a very amusing and concise way some of the risks of a kind of new intergovernmentalism. I should point out that there are a couple of EPRS publications that bear upon exactly the issue which Gabby and others have mentioned concerning the public, their expectations of EU action, and the potential of the conference on the future of Europe. I point you to our publication, Public Opinion and EU Policies, Exploring the Expectations Gap, which addresses exactly the issue that Giacomo was mentioning just a moment ago, namely exactly in which areas where the EU doesn't currently have competence do people expect more of the European Union. And in those areas where the EU does already have competence, we have also explored what we call the unused treaty potential. We've done quite a bit of work in this, and our publication on that tries to show how the existing provisions of the treaty could be more effectively exploited to deliver more public policy outcomes. Well, for us, it's been a voyage of rediscovery, to pick up on the title of the book, especially for those of us working in the European Parliament, thinking about the nature of the institution which we have our being in and which many of us have developed over the years a great deal of affection for. After the summer holiday, we will be coming back on Tuesday, the 7th of September with another EPRS event. That'll be done jointly with the new online French review and network think tank called Le Grand Continent. And we'll be to some degree exploring in greater detail one aspect of what we've been talking about, namely sovereignty. Sovereignty, of course, for many years was a dirty word in the EU context, but now it's been reborn in the notion of European sovereignty. Starting, I think, with President Macron. We're going to be talking about the future of sovereignty and of European sovereignty. So that's at lunchtime on Tuesday, the 7th of September. And then a couple of weeks later, we're dealing with other issues as well during the course of September, but we'll also be continuing with another institutional theme when our former Deputy Secretary General here in the European Parliament, David Harley, who some of you may remember, is publishing his sort of memoirs stroke diaries called Matters of Record, Inside European Politics 1992 to 2010. And he's going to be talking about the politics of the Parliament and of the other EU institutions as he witnessed them personally. So that'll be at lunchtime on Tuesday, the 21st of September. In the interim, it just falls to me to not only thank once again everybody involved and thank you, everybody who's been online and shared with us this, I think, very, very stimulating experience, not least to our two members of the European Parliament who joined us, and we appreciate that they've found time in a very busy day indeed to share some quality time with us so that we can talk about our common experience in the European institutions. especially, of course, the author, Giacomo, for allowing us to subject his analysis to such close scrutiny. And I think you came through with flying colours. Recommend this book to everybody and anybody who'd like to read it. It's available, incidentally, in the European Parliament Library. You can download a copy. Ebooks now, we have over 100,000 ebooks in the European Parliament Library. So a great opportunity if you want to do some vacation reading to use some of those ebooks. And to wish you a very, very enjoyable summer and more immediately, a very enjoyable afternoon. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Thank you very much to all. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Ciao.